Once you've found the right doctor and have told him or her about your pain, don't be afraid to take what they give you. Often, it will be an opioid medication. Some patients may be afraid of taking opioids because they're perceived as too strong or addictive. But that is far from actual fact.
Opioids.
The opioid crisis.
The opioid epidemic.
It's opioid crisis.
The opioid crisis.
America's overdose crisis, killing more people across the country than ever before.
Opioids are implicated in the vast majority of overdose deaths in the United States. Since 1999, more than 500,000 people have died from an overdose involving an opioid, and unfortunately that rate is not slowing. From April 2020 to March 2021, there were over 96,000 overdose deaths, a record 30% increase from a prior year. A significant portion of opioid addictions begin just like this.
The game before the playoffs, I tore my knee. I just had a fucking doctor that wanted to give me all these pills. I kept going back to the dude and he was giving me, whatever. He said these 5s aren't working right. I need something stronger. So he gives me 7.5s and some Dilaudid.
It had become all too clear that companies were turning a blind eye in the name of profits.
Population 3,200, but investigators say in little more than a decade, more than 20 million prescription pills were sold here, an average of 6,500 per person.
And the effects are staggering.
1 out of every 5 babies delivered has been exposed to drugs before they were born. Babies here go through withdrawal for drugs like painkillers and heroin.
Who's to blame here? Is it the drug manufacturers, is it the pharmacies, or is it the doctors?
Yes, and yes.
Over the years, the blame for the opioid epidemic has been directed towards addicts, drug dealers, and prescribing doctors. But the past 5 years have shown a renewed focus on the practices of pharmaceutical companies that manufacture and market prescription opioids. Pharmaceutical juggernaut Johnson & Johnson has often been labeled the kingpin of the opioid crisis. Founded in 1886, the company originally manufactured sterile surgical supplies and household products. Over the century that followed, the Johnson & Johnson business grew rapidly, expanding into pharmaceuticals in the mid-1940s. By 1994, Johnson & Johnson had created a mutant strain of poppy that allowed it to manufacture massive amounts of opioids. For years, Johnson & Johnson supplied more than 60% of all active ingredients for opioids manufactured and sold in the United States.
And at the height of the opioid crisis, Oklahoma became one of the worstly affected areas.
Oklahoma ranks #1 nationally for the non-medical use of pain relievers. Every week, 14 Oklahomans die because of drug overdose.
The Oklahoma Attorney General sued Johnson & Johnson and secured a $500 million verdict, the first of its kind against a drug manufacturer for their role in the opioid crisis.
So in the Johnson & Johnson Oklahoma case, if you look at the marketing practices, they're very damaging and hard to escape. The Oklahoma statute is very broad and says that causing a health harm to the community is enough to cause a public nuisance.
An Oklahoma judge ordered pharmaceutical giant Johnson & Johnson to pay more than $500 million.
The opioid crisis is an imminent danger and menace to Oklahomans. My judgment includes findings of fact and conclusions of law that the state met its burden, that the defendants, Janssen and Johnson & Johnson's misleading marketing and promotion of opioids created a nuisance.
Suffice it to say, Johnson & Johnson was not happy.
There's no basis, either factually or as a matter of law, for any liability associated with Johnson & Johnson's former subsidiaries who manufactured raw materials for opioid medications.
Drug companies have a very strong argument. We were marketing legitimate pain medicine to legitimate pain patients. It was highly regulated by the Food and Drug Administration, by the DEA, by state pharmacy boards. We were providing a badly needed medication.
It's largely driven by illegally manufactured drugs that are coming into the country from Mexico and elsewhere. The Oklahoma and I think the nation's opioid abuse crisis is a serious public health issue, but you can't sue your way out of the opioid abuse crisis.
But J&J would not go down without a fight.
We will be preparing our appellate papers promptly, and we look forward to presenting these issues to the Oklahoma Supreme Court.
That's exactly what Johnson & Johnson did. And they won.
With breaking news.
The Oklahoma Supreme Court reverses a landmark $465 million settlement with several opioid companies. The justices determined advertising for the pain meds did not create a public nuisance.
You are a minority with a tiny amount of cocaine or heroin in your pocket and you're caught, you go to jail. But if you're an affluent white executive of a large major corporation and you send billions of painkillers onto the street, you're protected because you were doing it as part of legitimate corporate business.
The higher court's overturning of the verdict is just another instance in which tort litigation has failed as an avenue in fighting the opioid epidemic. With pharmaceutical companies in power, it is likely they will maintain their immunity in the status quo. State governments are increasingly bringing actions against pharmaceutical giants, and the next few months will be telling as pending cases against similar drug makers wrap up. The opioid epidemic has made clear society's willingness to ascribe dispositionism to certain groups while holding those with power and status to situational standards.